Good morning, Little Masters, and welcome back to today's Tolkien Times. I'm the Man of the West, also from the Prancing Pony podcast. Let's keep week 28 going with today's Third Age Thursday. It's a time for us to revisit familiar and not so familiar stories of the Third Age. Now, for the rest of Series 4, we are going to be reading through the story of Cirion and Eorl from Unfinished Tales, learning about the origins of the people and nation of Rohan and their alliance with Gondor. Let's pick up where we left off last week after the deaths of Ondaher and both his sons, as we move into the section of the story called The Ride of Eorl. While the Éothéod still dwelt in their former home, that's the Vales of Anduin between the Carrack and the Gladden fields, they were well known to Gondor as a people of good trust, from whom they received news of all that passed in that region. They were a remnant of the Northmen, who were held to be akin in ages past to the Dunedain, and in the days of the great kings had been their allies and contributed much of their blood to the people of Gondor. It was thus of great concern to Gondor when the Éothéod removed into the far north in the days of Eärnil II, last but one of the kings of the southern realm. Now, we learn about this movement of the Éothéod in the appendices to the Lord of the Rings. They loved best the plains and delighted in horses and all feats of horsemanship. But there were many men in the middle Vales of Anduin in those days, and, moreover, the shadow of Dol Guldur was lengthening. When, therefore, they heard of the overthrow of the Witch King in the year 1975, they sought more room in the north and drove away the remnants of the people of Angmar on the east side of the mountains. But in the days of Éothéod, father of Eorl, they had grown to be a numerous people and were again somewhat straitened in the land of their home. And now we go back to the text in Unfinished Tales. The new land of the Éothéod lay north of Mirkwood, between the Misty Mountains westward and the Forest River eastward. Southward it extended to the confluence of the two short rivers that they named Graelyn and Langwell. Graelyn flowed down from Ered Mithrin, the Grey Mountains, but Langwell came from the Misty Mountains, and this name it bore because it was the source of Anduin, which from its junction with Graelyn they called Langflood. Messengers still passed between Gondor and the Éothéod after their departure, but it was some 450 of our miles between the confluence of Graelyn and Langwell, where was their only fortified burg, and the inflow of Limlight into Anduin, in a direct line as a bird might fly, and much more for those who journeyed on earth, and in like manner some 800 miles to Minas Tirith. Cirion became steward of Gondor in the year 2489. The menace from the north was ever in his mind, and he gave much thought to ways that might be devised against the threat of invasion from that quarter as the strength of Gondor diminished. He put a few men into the old forts to keep watch on the Undeeps, and sent scouts and spies into the lands between Mirkwood and Dagorlad. He was thus soon aware that new and dangerous enemies coming out of the east were steadily drifting in from beyond the Sea of Rhûn. They were slaying or driving north up the river running and into the forest the remnant of the Northmen, friends of Gondor that still dwelt east of Mirkwood. But he could do nothing to aid them, and it became more and more dangerous to gather news. Too many of his scouts never returned. So, because of all that, it wasn't until 20 years into his stewardship that Cirion learned that the enemy was preparing a huge attack against Gondor. Kin of the Wainriders, mustering along the southern edge of Mirkwood, the story says rudely armed, without great numbers of cavalry. But what they lacked in gear of war, they made up in numbers. And we'll go back to the text. In this peril, Cirion's thought turned at last in desperation to the Éothéod, and he determined to send messengers to them. But they would have to go through Calenardhon and over the Undeeps, and then through lands already watched and patrolled by the Balchath. Now, that's from the Westron Balk, meaning horrible, and Sindarin Hoth, meaning horde, before they could reach the Vales of Anduin. This would mean a ride of some 450 miles to the Undeeps, and more than 500 thence to the Éothéod. And from the Undeeps they would be forced to go warily and mostly by night until they had passed the shadow of Dol Guldur. Cirion had little hope that any of them would get through. He called for volunteers, and choosing 6 riders of great courage and endurance, he sent them out in pairs with a day's interval between them. Each bore a message learned by heart, and also a small stone incised with the seal of the stewards, that he should deliver to the Lord of the Éothéod in person if he succeeded in reaching that land. The message was addressed to Eorl, son of Léod, for Cirion knew that he had succeeded his father some years before when he was but a youth of 16. And though now no more than 25, was praised in all such tidings as reached Gondor as a man of great courage and wise beyond his years. Yet Cirion had but faint hope that even if the message were received, it would be answered. He had no claim on the Éothéod beyond their ancient friendship with Gondor to bring them from so far away with any strength that would avail. Now we'll see if any of those 6 messengers make it all the way to Eorl on that journey of nearly 1,000 miles through a lot of hostile territory with their message and that small stone. By the way, a footnote tells us what that seal of the stewards looked like. It was the letters R and then ND, because that's a single letter, and then another R with 3 stars above them. Now this stands for Arandur, meaning King's Servant. Now, folks, that does it for this week's Third Age Thursday. Come back next week to see what happens to those messengers. Please visit patreon.com/TolkienTimes to learn how you can support the show, get an ad-free feed, a monthly hangout with me, bonus weekly episodes, and a lot more. And join me again tomorrow on today's Tolkien Times as I welcome a very special guest for Fandom Friday. If you're watching this on YouTube, please be sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Listening to it on a podcast, follow or subscribe on your apps, and follow @Tolkien Times on social media. Finally, as Faramir says, go with the goodwill of all good men.